Don't touch that.
She was lying in the dry grass like something the summer had already decided to kill. One wrist was rubbed raw, like she'd been tied up and fought her way loose. Her throat was so dry she looked like she'd been swallowing sand. Her dress was torn at the thigh, dust stuck to her skin, and one boot was gone like she had tried to run and failed. Her horse stood a few yards behind her, breathing hard, eyes wide, reins dragging in the dirt. Flies circled her face, and she was too weak to wave them away. When she saw the rancher riding toward her, she did not scream. She lifted one shaking hand, not to ask for help, but to warn him away. Her lips moved before her voice came, dry and thin from heat and fear. Don't touch that. It wasn't a request, it was a warning. The words sounded wrong, like a command spoken by someone who knew exactly what would happen next. She didn't mean her skin. She meant the spot she was guarding with her life. If you're new here, subscribe now, because this story only gets harder the longer it goes on. Before we go on, how's your health been holding up this summer? Because before the day was done, that same summer was going to try and bury Caleb too. Caleb Rourke reined in his horse and stayed where he was for a long breath. He was 49 years old, and he had learned a long time ago that trouble did not always announce itself with gunfire. Sometimes it lay quiet in the grass and waited for a decent man to make a decent mistake. The heat rolled off the prairie in waves, the kind that made a man lightheaded if he stood too fast. Caleb slid down from the saddle anyway, slow and careful, boots sinking into dry earth. She was young, no more than 21, though her eyes looked older than they should have. Sweat had darkened her hair at the temples, and her breathing came shallow and uneven. One knee was bent wrong, the fabric stretched tight over it as if any movement would tear skin. Caleb had seen this before, a fall from a horse, a twisted joint, pain sharp enough to make the world narrow down to a single spot. He knelt beside her, keeping his voice low and steady. "You're hurt, miss." She swallowed and shook her head once, slow and deliberate. Her hand came up again, palm out, fingers trembling inches from his chest. "Don't touch that." Caleb frowned. That wasn't the kind of thing a hurt girl said. Not "don't touch me," not "please help." That. The rancher glanced around them, the empty land stretching flat and endless in every direction. No wagons, no homesteads close enough to hear a shout. Just sun, grass, and the faint ribbon of the Cimarron River in the distance. Leaving her here meant death by heat or by whoever had chased her this far. He could see it in the way her eyes kept flicking past him, toward the open land behind his horse. Caleb reached for her leg anyway. He did it gently, the way you handle a skittish animal, 2 fingers pressing just above the knee to test the joint. Her breath caught hard in her throat. For a heartbeat, he thought she was about to scream. Instead, his fingers brushed something cold, metal. Thin and unforgiving, hidden where no bandage should be. He froze, exactly as he was. Hand caught at the hem where he'd lifted it to check the injury. Mind suddenly sharp and clear. Caleb eased the fabric up just enough to see. A small derringer sat strapped high on her thigh in a narrow leather holster, worn smooth by use. Right beside it, tied flat against her skin, was a folded piece of paper, stiff and creased, sealed with dark red wax. Not a love note. It was the kind of paper a man burned before he ever admitted he'd touched it. It looked like the kind of copy pulled from a telegraph log, the kind that got men paid or buried. Not a scrap torn from a book. This was copied clean, folded with care, the kind of thing handled by people who worked behind counters and desks. The girl shut her eyes like a man waiting for the crack of a rifle. "I told you not to touch that," she whispered. Caleb pulled his hand back and sat on his heels, dust rising around him. In one instant, she was no longer just a hurt traveler. Women did not carry hidden guns unless they expected to be hunted. People did not seal papers with wax unless they needed them to survive a long ride. "Who's after you?" His voice stayed calm, but his eyes had hardened. She opened her eyes and looked straight at him. Men who don't like witnesses. If you've ever told the truth in the wrong place, you know the hooves usually arrive before the threats do. A faint sound carried on the wind then. Hooves, distant but steady. Caleb stood and scanned the horizon. A thin line of dust rose far off to the west, moving too straight to be cattle. Riders, more than one. He looked down at the girl again. "What's your name?" "Clara." She said, "Clara Whitmore." She tried to sit up and failed, pain flashing across her face. Caleb moved without thinking now. He slipped one arm behind her shoulders and lifted her just enough to lean her against his knee. The horse snorted behind them, sensing the change in the air. Caleb weighed his choices fast. He could ride on, leave her with water and hope. He could take her to town and walk straight into whatever mess that paper carried. Either way, the dust on the horizon meant the decision was already late. "I've got a ranch a few miles east," he said. "Shade? Water?" Clara hesitated, then nodded once. "They won't stop," she said. "Not once they start." Caleb helped her to her feet, careful of the injured leg, and guided her toward his horse. As he did, his eyes flicked once more to the wax seal, pressed with a mark he did not recognize but did not like. This was not a problem that belonged to a young woman alone. Caleb felt it plain. The danger wasn't just behind them, it was sealed tight against Clara's skin. As the first riders crested the rise in the distance, Caleb Rourke made a quiet choice that would cost him far more than he understood. If touching that had already changed everything, what would it cost him to protect it until the end? Caleb rode with one arm hooked around the reins and the other steady at Clara's back. She leaned against the saddle horn, teeth clenched, breathing through the pain like she'd done it before and survived. The prairie rolled past slow and bright, summer pressing down hard enough to make a man sweat without moving. Caleb kept his eyes forward, but his mind worked the way it always did when things went wrong. Quiet, methodical, looking for the edge that would keep him alive. The dust behind them stayed thin and far, but it stayed there. That bothered him. Men who quit did not keep pace. Men who planned did. He brought them into a shallow draw where the grass grew taller and the land dipped just enough to hide a rider. Caleb dismounted and helped Clara down slow, easing her weight until she could stand on one leg. She watched his hands the whole time, not fearful now, just careful. That told him more than any story. They reached the ranch as the sun tipped west, the house low and plain against the sky. Nothing fancy. A man did not keep fancy things if he wanted to stay unnoticed. Caleb swung open the door and the cool shade felt like mercy. He sat Clara on a chair near the table and poured water into a tin cup. She drank like someone who knew how to ration without thinking. He wrapped her knee with clean cloth and pressed where it would help, not where it would hurt. Then he dug an old spare pair of boots from a trunk and set them beside her chair. She nodded once when he got it right. "No thanks. No fuss. Just that nod." A person who's been cornered learns to save words, and Clara's silence told him she'd survived more than a bad fall. Caleb moved to the window and looked out across his land. Fence posts leaned where they had been cut once too often. A gate hung crooked, wire pulled loose. He had told himself it was age and weather. Now he knew better. "You want to tell me why men are riding hard to catch you?" He said it plain, not accusing. Clara looked down at her hands, then up at him. She did not rush. "I saw something I wasn't meant to see," she said, "something that makes men act brave when they're really scared." Caleb waited. Silence had a way of finishing a thought for a person. She told him enough. About working near the telegraph office. She'd taken that job to send money home after her family lost their land to men like Hawkins. About numbers and names that did not belong together. About money moving faster than cattle ever could. Land deeds were being talked about like they were cattle on a tally sheet. Honest ranchers' names got scratched out on the wire, and Hawkins' men got penciled in, and every time a judge or a sheriff needed convincing, the money showed up first. She did not say everything, and Caleb did not ask for it. Not yet. He took the folded paper from her and turned it over without opening it. The wax seal was clean, pressed hard, the mark sharp. He'd seen that kind of seal on papers that took old man Jenkins' pasture last year. Jenkins had signed because he was tired. Then he'd been found dead in a dry wash a month later. The land changed hands fast after that. Same neat look, same tidy end. Caleb set the paper down and pushed it back to her. "Keep it close," he said. "If you carry it, you carry the reason they won't stop. If that seal touched a federal wire line, it might reach a man who can't be bought." A sound drifted in through the open door. Hooves again. Closer now. Caleb closed the door and slid the bolt. He did not reach for a gun. Not yet. He reached for time. He spoke about small things while he listened, about the heat, about the way summer fooled men into thinking it would last. Clara listened too, eyes steady, breath even. She was young, but she was not soft. The riders did not come to the house. They passed by slow, then faster. Circling wide, looking, learning, Caleb felt the old anger settle in, the quiet kind that did not shake your hands. This was his land. He had earned it the hard way. And now someone thought they could take it by sending a frightened girl ahead like a warning sign. Out on the prairie, you could sometimes see a storm coming. In Dodge City, storms walked in wearing smiles. Caleb had seen smiles like that before, and they usually showed up right before a rope or a false charge. When the sound faded, Caleb made his choice. "We go to town at first light," he said. "Dodge City. In the open. Where people watch." Clara looked at him like she had not expected that answer. "They won't protect me," she said. Caleb gave a thin smile. "No," he said, "but they'll see you. And that's sometimes enough." Night came on slow. They ate simple food and sat on the porch where the air moved a little. Caleb kept his chair angled toward the dark. Habit more than fear. Clara watched the stars come out, one by one. Like someone counting blessings she did not fully trust. If you're still with me, go ahead and subscribe now. This is one of those stories that rewards patience. Pour yourself a cup of tea, settle in, and let the night do its work. And tell me this, what time is it where you are right now? And where are you listening from? Caleb did not go to bed right away. He sat there a while longer, listening to the night like it might confess something. Out on his land, even the quiet had a sound. A cricket that stopped too suddenly, a horse that breathed too loud, the faint scrape of leather that did not belong to his own gear. He kept his coffee in his hands until it went cold, because cold coffee was still better than a warm surprise. Claire said almost nothing. She just watched the fence line as if she could feel eyes on it. Caleb finally stood and walked to the window, careful not to let the lamp throw his silhouette. A man who grew up on open country learned that you could be seen long before you could see. In the moonlight, the dust on the road looked like a pale ribbon. And then he saw it. That wasn't moonlight playing tricks. That was metal, a small glint out near the gate, quick and gone, catching a wink of light. Caleb did not reach for his gun. Not yet. He reached for a nail on the wall, and he quietly hooked the door bolt twice, the way you do when you suspect someone is counting on you to forget. Caleb woke before the light, the way men do when their sleep is thin and their thoughts are loud. The house was still, boards cooling after a long night of heat. He sat on the edge of the bed and listened. Wind in the grass, a horse shifting weight in the corral, nothing else. That never meant much. He brewed coffee strong enough to wake a fence post and drank it standing across the room. Clara slept on the narrow cot, one knee wrapped, boots set neatly beneath it. She slept light, breathing shallow, like someone who had learned not to sink too deep. Then he did the small things that saved men more often than prayers. He checked the cinch on both saddles. He shortened one stirrup on Clara's side so her bad knee would not have to stretch. And he planned to keep her at a walk, even if it took all morning. He wrapped her knee once more, tighter, not cruel, just firm, the way you wrap a fence wire when the wind keeps pulling it loose. He slid a canteen into the saddlebag and another into his own, because out here water mattered more than bullets. He walked to the back of the house and looked at the ground where the shadows were still thick. Hoof marks, faint, careful, angled like the riders had come in to watch and left without wanting to be heard. Caleb rubbed a thumb over the print and felt his jaw tighten. He did not say a word to Clara about it yet. Some truths helped. Some truths only made a person shake, and he needed her steady. He left the house without a sound and let the dirt speak first. In the morning, the dirt confirmed what he'd felt in the dark. 2 riders had come close in the night, close enough to see the house, far enough to stay out of range. They had not come to talk. They had come to learn. By the time he returned inside, Claire was sitting up, tying her hair back with steady hands. No questions. She already knew it was time. They rode out just as the sun broke over the land, the light low and honest. Caleb set the pace slow enough for her knee, but fast enough to look like they were not afraid. Fear drew attention. Calm made men impatient. They had not gone a mile when the first rider appeared on the rise ahead, then another, then 2 more behind, not charging, not hiding. That told Caleb everything he needed to know. He raised one hand and eased his horse to a stop. The men rode closer, dust curling around their boots. The one in front wore a deputy badge that caught the sun too clean to be old. His smile was practiced and thin. "Morning, rancher," the man said. Looking for a young lady who may have lost her way, Caleb tipped his hat. "Polite enough. Plenty of folks lose their way out here," he said. "What makes you think she's with me?" The man glanced at Claire and smiled wider. "'Cause she looks like she belongs to us." Caleb looked at the badge, then. Not long, just long enough. The pin sat wrong. The stamp was shallow. He had seen real ones. This was not that. Caleb shifted his weight and his horse followed without being asked. "You mind telling me who sent you?" he said. The smile slipped. The rider's hand drifted toward his gun. That was when another man moved off to the side, circling, thinking he was clever. Caleb acted before the thought finished forming. He leaned and shoved the lead rider's horse hard in the neck. The animal stumbled. The man pitched sideways, and Caleb was already moving. Dust rose. The horse snorted sharp, hooves scraping dry earth. That dull thud of a fist landing sounded like a board being slapped. Someone shouted. A fist connected with a jaw. A body hit the ground hard enough to knock the breath out of it. Caleb did not linger. He struck once more to keep the man down, then stepped back. No rage, no flourish, just work. Clara had not screamed. She stayed mounted, reins tight, eyes tracking the others. One of the men grabbed for her horse. She kicked out sharp and clean, catching him in the shoulder. He cursed and fell back. The rest hesitated. That hesitation saved them. Hesitation only lasts once, and Caleb knew the next time they met, it wouldn't end with bruises. Caleb looked straight at the man with the badge. "That thing on your chest," he said. "It's fake, and if you come back on my land again, I'll hang it on your fence post myself." The men gathered their wounded pride and their bruised bodies and rode off, throwing looks that promised trouble later. They always did. Caleb checked Clara then, quick and careful. She nodded. He believed her. They rode on without speaking for a while, the road opening up ahead. Dodge City still miles away. Clara broke the silence first. "They won't stop now," she said. Caleb nodded. "No," he said. They never do. As the town came into view hours later, Caleb felt the weight of the choice he had made settle heavy in his chest. The fight at the ranch was nothing. That had been simple. Town was where things twisted. He slowed his horse and looked at Clara. "Once we ride in there," he said, "this stops being quiet." She met his eyes. "That's why I took the paper," she said. Caleb thought of the fake badge, the practiced smile, the way men like that counted on silence more than bullets. As they passed the first buildings at the edge of Dodge City, Caleb had one clear thought that would not leave him. The men who chased them were only the hands. The mind behind it all was already waiting. Caleb rode into Dodge City with the same steady pace he used on open land. Slow enough to look harmless, fast enough not to invite trouble. The town was already awake. Boards creaking under boots, horses tied 2 and 3 deep, dust hanging in the air like it belonged there. Summer heat settled early in places like this. It pressed men into short tempers and quicker choices. Clara sat straight in the saddle now, pain held tight behind her eyes. She watched everything, storefronts, men leaning on posts, the way conversations paused just a second too long when they passed. That pause told her more than words ever could. Caleb felt it too. A town had a rhythm, and this one had missed a beat. Caleb felt that missed beat in his teeth. A dog that should have barked did not. A man who should have looked away stared too long, then pretended he had not. Even the horses seemed to stand tighter at the hitching rail, ears flicking, waiting. Clara kept her hands low and calm, but Caleb noticed how she walked. She favored at the bad leg. Yes, but she also kept to the edge of the boardwalk, where a person could step off fast if something went wrong. That was not a habit you learned in church. That was a habit you learned from being chased. Caleb passed a storefront window and caught a reflection that was not his, a hat brim behind them, just far enough back to feel casual. He did not turn. He only adjusted his pace. Slow, then slower, then steady again. If the shadow matched him, it meant they were being herded, not followed. They stopped near the edge of Front Street where a man could see trouble coming from both ends. Caleb had one plan, simple and stubborn. Get her to a man who wrote things down. A newspaper, a preacher, any place where words became public and could not be stuffed back in a pocket. Caleb dismounted first, then helped Clara down, careful of her knee. He tied the horses where he could keep an eye on them and let his gaze drift, casual as smoke. He knew towns like this. He had driven cattle through them, slept on their edges, watched good men turn mean by morning. Dodge City wore its reputation heavy, but it was still a place that pretended to be lawful in daylight. They had not taken 10 steps when a voice called Caleb's name. Too familiar, too sure. Jed Crowley stepped out from the shade near a saloon, hat tipped just enough to be polite. The badge was there again, bright as new money. Caleb looked at it and then at the man's eyes. Nothing warm lived there. "Rourke," Jed said. "Funny seeing you in town." Caleb nodded once, did not smile, did not slow. Jed's gaze slid to Clara, lingering. "You found her then?" Caleb stopped, just long enough to make it clear he chose to. "I don't answer questions from men wearing store-bought badges," he said. Real lawmen didn't polish their metal like it was Sunday church. A few heads turned. Jed laughed, easy and loud. "No need for that," he said. "We're all just trying to help. Help always came with strings in places like this." Clara shifted closer to Caleb, her shoulder brushing his arm, not hiding, choosing a side. Jed leaned in, voice dropping. "You don't know what you're carrying, Rourke. Best thing you can do is walk away." Caleb met his eyes. "I already did walk away once," he said. "Cost me a fence and half a pasture." Jed's smile thinned. That was then. The street felt narrower all of a sudden. Men had drifted closer without looking like they had. That too told a story. Caleb took Clara by the elbow and steered her away. Jed did not stop them. Not yet. Men like him liked witnesses when they thought they were winning. They moved down the street, past the barber, past the dry goods store, past faces that pretended not to know them. Clara spoke low. "They're setting something up," she said. Caleb nodded. "I know." They reached the telegraph office just as the door opened and a clerk stepped out. Pale and sweating, he froze when he saw Clara. His eyes flicked to Caleb, then past him like he was already measuring the distance to the back alley. Clara didn't rush him. She did not speak loud. She only said his name. That was enough. The clerk swallowed and shook his head. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "Not today." His hands were stained with ink, but his fear was fresh. In a town like this, Hawkins didn't need to walk in the door to make a man obey. Caleb stepped between them without thinking. That made the clerk flinch harder. Before anything more could be said, hands closed on Caleb's arms from behind, firm, practiced. Someone read out a charge: kidnapping, assault, words meant to stick whether they were true or not. That's the oldest trick in a frontier town. Make a decent man look guilty, then take his land while he's caged. Caleb did not struggle. Struggling made things worse in towns like this. He let them turn him, let them pull his wrist back. He caught Clara's eye once. "Go," he said. She hesitated, just a heartbeat. Then she nodded and slipped away into the crowd. Head down, moving like someone who knew how to disappear. They marched Caleb toward the jail, boots loud on boards. Jed walked alongside, close enough to whisper, "You should have stayed on your land," he said. Caleb looked ahead. "You should have bought real metal for that badge." The cell was hot and smelled like old sweat and worse choices. They shoved him inside and shut the door. The sound echoed longer than it should have. Caleb stood still for a moment and let the cell speak. The heat sat on his shoulders like a wet blanket. The air did not move. Somewhere down the row, a man coughed, the kind of cough that never fully left. Caleb looked at the lock, then at the hinges, then at the floor. He was not planning an escape. Not yet. He was planning to understand the kind of men who ran this place, because every jail had a language. This one said money first, truth last. A deputy walked past and did not meet Caleb's eyes. That told Caleb the deputy did not want to remember this day later. Then a laugh drifted in from outside, too light for a serious town. Caleb realized the worst part. They were not trying to scare him into silence. They were trying to make him look guilty in front of the only people who could help him. Caleb sat on the bench and waited. Waiting was something he understood. Outside, the town went on like nothing had happened. Inside, time slowed and thickened. Footsteps came after a while, not the heavy ones of a lawman. Lighter, careless. A man stepped into view, leaning on the bars. He smiled like he was doing a favor. "You make trouble easy." "Rancher," he said. Caleb looked at him and thought about Clara moving through the town alone, carrying something men would kill for. He thought about his land, his fences, and the quiet mornings he might not get back. The man reached for the keys. That was when Caleb stood. Because some traps are meant to be seen only after they close, the man at the bars did not hurry. He stood there like time belonged to him, keys resting loose in his hand, smile thin and tired. Caleb stayed on his feet, shoulders square, breathing slow. He had learned a long time ago that a jail cell did not make a man powerless. It only changed the rules. The man talked like men always did when they thought they had the upper hand. He spoke about misunderstanding, about how easy things could be if Caleb just stayed still and let smarter men handle the trouble. Caleb listened without nodding, without shaking his head. He watched the man's stance, the way his weight leaned forward, the way his eyes kept drifting to the door behind him. That door opened. Another man stepped in, heavier, meaner, carrying the smell of cheap liquor and bad confidence. This one did not talk much. He reached through the bars and grabbed for Caleb's shirt. Caleb moved. He hooked the man's wrist and twisted. Sharp and sudden. Bone met iron. The keys clattered to the floor. The second man lunged, swinging wide, and Caleb took the hit on the shoulder and answered with an elbow that stopped the breath cold. It was fast and ugly and quiet enough not to carry past the walls. When it was over, one man lay groaning on the floor, and the other leaned against the bars, eyes wide, learning something new about pain. Caleb picked up the keys and stepped back. He did not run. Running drew attention. He waited. Footsteps came, real ones this time, measured, official. A uniform filled the doorway, not the kind you bought in a back room. This one fit like it belonged there. The man looked at the scene, took it in, and sighed like he had expected nothing else. "Sit down, rancher," he said. "You're making my day long." Caleb sat. He did not smile. Outside that jail, Clara moved through Dodge City with the same care Caleb used on open land. She kept her head down, her pace steady, and her eyes busy. Fear rode with her, but it did not lead. She knew where to go. She had thought about it long before she ever took the paper. She'd heard talk at the telegraph desk about a deputy marshal passing through on railroad business. Men complained about him because he asked questions that didn't stay bought. So Clara waited for the day she'd need him. There were men who wore badges for towns, and there were men who wore them for the country. She needed the second kind. The office was not marked fancy, just a door, a window, a man inside who looked up when she knocked and did not smile right away. She spoke plain. She spoke careful. She told him about the paper, about the numbers, about the names that kept showing up where they should not. She told him about the threats carried on wire and sealed with wax. She did not raise her voice. She did not cry. The man listened. When she finished, he asked for the paper. Then he asked for the names of the telegraph station. Then he asked her to sit. Back at the jail, Caleb was moved to a different cell. This one had more eyes on it. Men passed by and looked in like he was something they were trying to decide on. Jed Crowley came once, stood outside, said nothing. That worried Caleb more than words ever could. Hours passed. Heat pressed in. Sweat dried and came again. Late in the afternoon, the door opened and the same uniformed man returned. He looked tired now and careful. "You're being held for now," he said. "But things are changing." Caleb leaned back against the wall. Things always changed, he thought. Usually not for the better. Outside, voices rose, not shouting, not panic. That was different. Boots crossed the street in numbers. Men gathered. Someone read something out loud. Names, dates, places. Caleb stood when he heard one name carried through the open window. Silas Hawkins. The uniformed man watched him. "You know him," he said. Caleb nodded. "I know his fences." The cell door opened again. This time, the man with the country badge stood there. He looked at Caleb like a man measuring weight. "You're coming with me," he said. "Not free." "Not yet. But close enough to matter." They walked Caleb out into the light. The street had filled. Men stood quiet. Women watched from doorways. Clara stood near the telegraph office, hands folded tight. Eyes never leaving him. Caleb caught her gaze, just once. It was enough. The man with the badge raised his voice. He spoke about interference with federal lines, about falsified documents tied to railway interests, about men using town law to hide bigger crimes. When money crossed state lines on the wire, it stopped being a town secret. And when land papers got forged for a railroad, it stopped being just a neighbor fight. A murmur ran through the crowd. Jed Crowley was there too, face pale, badge catching the sun in all the wrong ways. The man with the badge looked straight at him. "That thing on your chest," he said. "You should take it off." Jed did not move. Two other men did. They stepped in close, hands firm. No rush. Jed's eyes found Caleb for a brief second. They were not angry anymore. They were afraid. Silas Hawkins did not appear. Men like him rarely did when the ground started to shift. But his name hung heavy in the air, and that was new. Caleb felt the shape of the fight change. This was no longer about a rancher and a girl. This was about a man who thought distance made him untouchable. As the crowd slowly broke and evening settled in, Caleb stood beside Clara. Neither spoke. They did not need to. Somewhere in town, a door was closing. Somewhere else, another was about to open. And Silas Hawkins was finally going to learn what happened when the truth stopped traveling alone. Because men like Hawkins didn't surrender, they collected their last move in silence. Morning came softer than the day before. The heat was still there. The dust still hung in the air. But something in Dodge City had shifted. Men stood straighter. Conversations carried less whisper and more weight. When the truth shows its face, even briefly, it leaves a mark. Caleb stood on the edge of the street with Clara beside him. No one was chasing them now. No one was pretending not to see them either. That mattered more than most folks ever admit. Silas Hawkins did not show himself that day. He did not need to. Men like him always believed distance made them untouchable, but distance only works until someone is willing to cross it. The man with the country badge finished his business and moved on. Paperwork would follow. Long days, longer nights. That was not Caleb's world. He had done his part by standing still when running would have been easier. They walked out of town as the sun leaned west, horses slow, steps measured. No parade, no cheers. Just the sound of leather and dust and a road that waited. Clara broke the silence first. Not with words about fear or gratitude. She spoke about small things, the smell of the river in summer, the way towns felt different when you were not hiding. Caleb listened. And that was its own kind of answer. Back at the ranch, the land looked the same as it always had. Fences still needed mending. Water still needed watching. The work did not change just because a man did the right thing. That was one of the first lessons Caleb had learned in life, and one worth remembering. They sat on the porch as evening settled in. Caleb poured coffee. Clara wrapped her hands around the cup like it was something earned. No rush, no plans spoken out loud. Caleb thought about how close he had come to riding past her that first day. How easy it would have been to tell himself it was not his problem. Most days, walking past feels sensible, but later, it feels like a debt. And you always pay it in the mirror. Clara watched the horizon and spoke without turning. I almost dropped that paper, she said. Almost left it where it lay. Caleb nodded. Most people do, he said. Most people leave the hard thing behind and hope it stays quiet. That was the heart of it. Not courage in gunfire, not strength in fists, but the moment when you decide whether to carry something heavy because it matters. Caleb had lived most of his life believing solitude was safety, that if he kept his head down and his fences straight, the world would pass him by. He learned late that the world does not pass anyone by. It waits, then it tests. Clara had learned something too, that running keeps you alive, but standing still can change more than just your own path. She did not need saving. She needed space to choose, and Caleb gave her that by choosing first. They did not speak of love, not yet. Love spoken too early sounds like a promise you might not keep. Instead, they spoke of tomorrow, of work to be done, of fences to fix together. That was how something real began. Not loud, not dramatic, just present. If you're listening to this and wondering why a story like this stays with you, it is because you have stood where Caleb stood. You have seen something you could have walked past. You have felt that pull between comfort and conscience. Here's the truth most people do not say out loud. A good life is not built by avoiding trouble. It is built by choosing which trouble is worth your name. Here are 2 questions worth keeping. What have you been pretending not to see because it feels easier? And if someone younger watched your choices this week, what would they learn? Courage or caution? Caleb did not become a hero that summer. He became something better, a man who could sit on his porch at night and know he had not betrayed himself. Clara did not become fearless. She became honest, and honesty has a strength fear never will. If you've got one hard truth you've been dodging, don't wait for a rider line on the horizon to force your hand. If this story hit close to home, tap like. And if you want more nights like this, subscribe. I'll keep the coffee warm. You keep showing up. Take a moment tonight. Set your phone down. Ask yourself one hard question and do not rush the answer. What would your life look like if you stopped walking past the things that matter? Sometimes all it takes is one choice. One moment when you decide to touch the thing you were warned to leave alone. And if you're honest, you already know what your thing is. So what are you going to do with it?